So hello to welcome to AMP Live, episode 3. We're here joined by the BHTA's new chief executive, Dr. Simon Festing. How are you, Simon?
Yeah, very well, thank you, and good morning.
Thank you. You keeping well through lockdown? How have things been?
Well, I would say overall this is quite an unsettled and fairly troubling times that we're in. So, of course, as an association, we're making do as best we can with this new normal. So, working at home, for example, and we're getting on fine as an association. But of course, our main concern is for our members.
Yeah, operationally, how have sort of things operated at your end? You keeping in touch with the industry, and people, you say people are working from home. How has that worked?
Well, so there's been a huge increase, more than usual, of electronic information, emails, online meetings, as you would expect. And of course, many of the ways that we used to meet physically face-to-face, either in meetings or trade shows, this has been cancelled, postponed, and actually we don't know what the future will be. So we're all making do as best we can of this electronic communication. And of course, it does actually offer some advantages. So many of our members, it's a burden for them, of course, to get around to association meetings. And therefore, by doing things online, we can actually hopefully widen participation and include more of our members in our activities.
Obviously you've been in the role a few months now. How have you settled in? How have you found it and the industry and so on?
Well, it's been a fairly traumatic start for me personally, because of course I was only in the job a couple of weeks, and things started to get a little bit fraught with the virus, and then we went into lockdown. And since then, we've been dealing with all of those very disruptive issues. Some of the topics that we've been covering have hit the national headlines. Our members, of course, heavily involved in both supply and demand for PPE products. Testing has been a major issue. Key worker status has been a big issue for our member companies. So I would say actually we've been pretty frantic trying to keep up with the massive flood of information and essentially trying to keep our members abreast of the most relevant, detailed, up-to-date information that directly applies to them to allow them to run their businesses as best they can.
From obviously some of it has been documented when you started the role. What is your background career-wise before you came into the BHTA?
So I'm a medical doctor from some time back, but I've been involved in policy communications, and then as a chief executive of not-for-profit societies and associations for over a decade. So I'm really familiar with this as a sort of managerial position. The challenge, I think, with the healthcare sector and assistive technology is that it's so broad. There are so many policies. We're dealing with NHS, health and social care, or Department of Work and Pensions. There are just so many different policy areas. And of course, there's retail, manufacturing, import, export, wholesalers. There's just keeping up with the breadth of the sector and trying to provide them all with the relevant information is a major challenge. But I think the members benefit enormously from having such a trade association that can keep abreast of those issues.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously the support there and communication being high on the agenda, as everybody's in lockdown and so on. Do you think that's one of the key things that's helping the industry get through this is communication and speaking to one another and helping each other through it from own experiences?
Well, I think it's particularly at times like this, more than ever, that companies can see the benefit of a trade association to bring them together, share information, take action on their behalf, and basically give them value for what they get in terms of membership. So we have been extremely active in a number of areas. For example, having to write essentially an emergency letter to the NHS procurement team about some severe disruption in payments to some of our members, a lack of clarity around procurement and what's happening during this crisis. And in other cases, we've done nationwide initiatives to keep consumers informed about wheelchair services. So there's just a huge flurry of activity. I think that members are always and rightly asking, what is the benefit in paying to be a member of a trade association? I think that now they can see we offer real benefits. It's not quite like advertising, so they're not going to see a sudden and instant increase in sales. It's not quite the same as insurance, which of course there are problems with insurance not paying out at the moment, but it's about working together for the long-term benefit of the sector so that everybody is better off if the trade association is working well, and involving and engaging the members. It's the members who benefit and it's their trade association.
And you think obviously the work throughout this time will stand you in good stead to do that moving forward, as well as obviously from a BHTA perspective, but from the members out there as well and others?
So there has been a massive increase in workload during this time because of the degree of disruption and because everybody's frantically scrambling around for the right information to just to keep their business model afloat and trying to work out what to do. So we've provided in some cases that generic information from government about the support it provides and given advice to our members. But most of the time we're looking to add more value than that and really work on the specific policies that our members are directly interested in, whether that is how they can supply or get hold of PPP equipment, for example, or how they can make sure that there is continuity in the services they provide, for example, going into care homes with the key worker status. We've been providing just vast amounts of information to our members in response to their queries on all of these topics.
Yeah, one story, a really good story I'd seen from you guys throughout this was that the BHTA had brought together a lot of the NHS wheelchair service providers to help get support out there for those guys who need it through this time. How has that worked and so on? I thought it was a really good story.
Well, the BHTA has been very concerned about disruption to services such as from wheelchair providers during this time. So, of course, we've brought them together in a sense as a super alliance going perhaps beyond just the traditional boundaries within the association. And we have over 100 providers who have put their name up to an interactive map where consumers can go and see where they can get their nearest services with a proper explanation of what those services might entail. So there's been a lot of coordination and a lot of advice. This is one of those difficult topics where we have sought to understand how we can go further and offer the entire sector services. But those who are not members of the trade association, we don't have the right contact details, they're not engaged, we can't communicate in the same way. And that's a great example of where there's such a clear benefit to being a member of the trade association.
So far, obviously, we're not out of the other side from a business point of view in a lot of ways as of yet. How do you think this has so far affected the industry, and how do you think it will continue to do so going forward?
Well, I have to be frank, these are very troubling times for many of our members and broadly for the sectors in which they operate. Not only have we had this very disruptive lockdown, we're now facing what is clearly a big financial recession, and we have the added potential instability of Brexit on the horizon, where the talks are at the moment look quite fraught. And that's all just the obvious things. Other challenges that will face our sector will be the continuing shortfall in footfall in retail areas and what that means for their retail sales. We are going to see almost certainly accelerating changes in NHS procurement. We're going to see problems in financial viability of care homes. So there are all sorts of difficulties and challenges which face our members and the sector as a whole. So yeah, we're going to have to work extremely hard to try and make sure that these things are put right. There are perhaps some opportunities on the horizon, like the government's review of the mobility sector and vehicles in particular, where we hope we can get a good outcome for the sector. But mostly it's a set of challenges very real at the moment.
Yeah, from obviously you mentioned retailers there. From their point of view, how do you see this? How do you see this progressing specifically from that market? It must be tough, obviously, from a retail perspective, to think, when's the footfall going to return? When are we going to get back to proper normality?
Well, the retail traders have long faced this problem of the gradual decline of the high street in comparison to online, and that presents many challenges for a sector such as mobility, where some of the high value, high ticket items are much more difficult to sell online, and it's more tricky to apply a code of conduct and have an ethical approach, which in the long term is going to be beneficial for all of us, which is why, of course, the British Healthcare Trade Association runs its code of practice, which is there to try and bolster consumer confidence in this market. So it's more of a challenge now as footfall has declined, and we simply don't know for sure when it's going to pick up. Of course, we hope now the weather's getting better, virus is on the decline, that things will improve, but there's an acceleration of this long-term challenge as how to maintain viable retail outlets. And a lot of that is down to the business models and the nimbleness of our members, trying to make sure that they offer what is relevant with the correct pricing and the correct approach to sales in those outlets. So, of course, they're doing the good work, and we'll be there to help them with information and support as best we can.
Yeah, and sort of a similar question to that from a supplier point of view. How do you think they can adapt to serve the dealers and therefore the end users in the best way possible?
Well, suppliers are likewise facing difficult times. So that's overall. I think in some places, some of our members are doing well at a time like this because they may be supplying products which are in high demand, and certainly some of those have now gained major government contracts to supply PPE, something we're very excited that our members have been able to fulfill that, because I mean the government is looking for not orders of the odd tens of thousands but tens of millions. So that's great that our sector can deliver, and interesting questions are going to develop quite soon as to where those supplies are coming from and whether they can be brought closer to home so that we're not dependent on these distant overseas markets like China, where of course we know there can be problems with supply chain disruption. For others of our members in the supplier market, yes, again, there are quite a lot of challenges now. We foresee both gluts and shortages of equipment because of this supply chain disruption. And there may be cases like beds, for example, where there's been a big increase in supply, for example, with the Nightingale hospitals, but now there's too much product on the market, so there may be some cutback in the level of new orders. So that's going to be challenging for our suppliers. Again, the first and the best thing that we are offering is to bring the members together to coordinate and share information and intelligence internally as to how best to understand and cope with this new market reality. But the challenges are very real.
Yeah, you mentioned China there and the reliance on overseas trade. Do you think this, obviously having to be a bit more reliant on what we've got in Britain, do you think this going forward could help the British trade longer term? Obviously, it'll be tough for the first few months, but going forward.
And of course, there's been an interesting national debate now about the supply chains and did people really understand the complexity? And we've now discovered their vulnerability to supply chain disruption in this pandemic. Of course, this is an unusual situation, but it does illustrate the potential problems. Of course, the reasons are very clear cut for how this has come about, in that those Far Eastern companies are mass manufacturing these products at a lower cost than we have been able to do. That's a global supply chain phenomenon that's been going on for decades now. So do we want to put that into reverse? There is certainly going to be a degree of that now. Government is going to be concerned about security of supplies of this type of equipment. But how we go about that, we don't know. Of course, the UK still has manufacturing base, and as would be expected, we specialise in the areas of the higher value added, more specialist type of equipment that's more complex and difficult to either manufacture or transport. So I would imagine many of our members could be thriving in those kind of areas of supplying the very high specification equipment. And of course, there's going to be, I think, more confidence in general in purchasing within the UK, or perhaps we might be talking Europe, where we would have greater trust that the manufacturers would be making them to specification, so we wouldn't be having these scandals of poor quality product. So there will be interesting shifts, but we don't know how far they go, because cost is always going to be an issue, and the Far East does have that advantage, certainly in terms of the low-end bulk manufacturing cost advantage.
Yeah, to sort of round up and conclude, moving forward, why does the BHTA have a plan of how it can help members moving forward throughout this, and as the years come by, and adapt in any certain way?
I think it'd be fair to say that everybody was caught off guard by this virus, and exposed a plethora of challenges. It's accelerated a business model towards more online ways of working. That will set off a whole lot of other challenges. I think our mind is now turning to away from just the short-term business disruption and on to those longer-term challenges, such as NHS procurement, such as the shape of the retail market, such as ethical buying and selling when there's more stuff done online. So we want to really be a very forward-looking association and try and identify the challenges for our members well in advance, so that we can meet those challenges by the time they arrive.
That's great. That's all from us. Thanks for joining us, Simon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.